Welcome, Advocate. You can introduce yourself and tell us what do you do here at NCR.
Okay, my name is Kidilatile Lodi. At the NCR, I look after a department that is responsible for providing education to consumers as well as communication.
Okay. Advocate, can you give us more information? What is the role or the mandate of NCR?
So just to summarize it, I will say the primary role of the NCR is consumer protection. So we are here to protect consumer as far as credit is concerned. So how we offer consumers protection, firstly we register what we call credit providers. These are entities who lend money to consumers. So we protect consumers by ensuring that they follow the National Credit Act. We register debt counselors. These are individuals who are responsible to offer consumers who are over-indebted assistance in terms of relief. We register them and we ensure that they also comply with the National Credit Act. We also register credit bureaus. These are entities that actually keeps records of consumers who've got credit. We register payment distribution agents. These are agents responsible to ensure that consumers who are under debt review, their monies are being distributed to credit providers accordingly. We also register alternative dispute resolution agents. If a consumer has any credit-related dispute, they can actually approach the ADRAs. So consumer protection, we offer it to consumers by regulating this industry and ensuring that our registrants do comply with what they need to comply with as far as the National Credit Act is concerned.
Thank you. So in your own view, do you think the general public in South Africa, looking at the vast population which we have, do you think they understand the role which NCR plays?
Look, I would say it's a mixed bag. You would have a certain portion that do understand their rights. By the way, with every right there is an obligation. So there are consumers who do understand what their rights are or what the NCR's mandate is. There are some consumers who still lack information and knowledge. There are some who are blatantly ignorant to the information that we offer. So to a certain extent, yes, the public is aware. However, as the NCR, we believe there's still more scope for us to educate consumers more in terms of educating them on our mandate and how this can protect them as consumers.
Okay. These consumer rights, in a nutshell, what are they, consumer rights?
So as a consumer, you have a right to apply for credit.
Okay.
But remember, you have an obligation that when you apply for credit, you disclose information that is correct.
Everything.
Everything. So you don't hide anything under the carpet. You need to act in good faith. So as a consumer, you have a right to approach a lender and ask for credit. If your credit is declined, you have another right to know why. So they need to explain to you why your credit is declined. Another right that consumers have is to access a free credit report. Now this is very important, and a credit report is relevant to even consumers whose accounts are in good standing. So oftentimes we hear consumers saying, oh no, I'm not in areas, I don't have to look at my credit report. But with the prevalence of fraud and identity theft, it's very important for consumers to have access to the credit report, and you have a right to a free credit report annually. So there's no excuse. There is no excuse by saying you cannot afford it because you have a right to free credit report. On that credit report, if there's any information that you do not agree with, you want to dispute it, you have a right to dispute that information with that particular credit providers, that credit bureau that provided the report. So that's another right for you as a consumer. You have a right to disclosure of information. If you go to a lender and you're applying, you want to borrow money, you have a right to be given what we call a quotation. So it's a disclosure agreement where they tell you that if you're borrowing 10,000 over a period of 12 months, how much would you pay us at the end of the 12 months? That should include the charges that they're going to charge to that amount that you are borrowing. So you have a right to be given that statement or disclosure, we refer to it as quotation as well. On that quotation, you have a right to think about it for 5 days. So you should not be pressured to immediately sign on the dotted line.
5 days?
5 days,
okay.
Yes, you have a right, 5 days. You take that disclosure, you go home, you read it. If there's anything that you do not understand, you ask up until you are comfortable that you understand the content, and you actually need that credit, because sometimes people borrow money even if they don't need to borrow money.
Yes.
Thereafter, you go back and then you can sign on the dotted line because you would have understand. So those are some of the rights that consumers have. If you're feeling financially distressed, over indebted, in terms of the National Credit Act as well, you have a right to seek relief by applying for debt counseling. I've mentioned that we register debt counselors as well. So it's your right as a consumer to approach a debt counselor and say, I don't want to run from my creditors. I am overloaded. I mean, there are many reasons why people find themselves in that situation.
Yes, especially with this...
with the economic climate,
yes.
retrenchments and all that. So you have a right to approach a debt counselor. They will take you through the process and assist in finding the relief.
Wonderful. If I understand you well, so it's like NCR is more into the side of consumers than the credit providers.
Look, our mandate has to be balanced, because credit providers as well, they do have rights.
Yeah.
I've mentioned that with every right there is an obligation. However, consumer protection is our primary mandate. Yes, we are here to look after consumers, to ensure that they know their rights, to ensure that they enforce their rights, to ensure that they also, their obligations are carried out accordingly. Like I said, every right comes with an obligation.
I hear you. Coming back to this point which you just mentioned, this 5 days window.
Yes.
So every consumer has got the right of these 5 days.
Absolutely.
So if you sign it, let's say you signed it before the 5 days period and you change your mind, would that 5 days still apply?
Remember, the 5 days is for you to think about it.
Okay.
I've mentioned that before you sign on the dotted line. So here's an offer. They've given you an offer.
Yes.
In that 5 days, you can also go to lender B, lender C, lender D,
Yes.
and see what offers do they bring to the table, because they've got different credit granting mechanisms in terms of determining your risk as a consumer.
Yes.
So once you sign on the dotted line, you are entering into an agreement.
It's done.
So it's done.
Because sometimes these guys, they're enticing. You receive a phone call, we'll give you a credit of so much, we've given you a credit of so much, and you didn't have time to check what are the interests and so forth.
Yes.
And you've agreed.
Yeah. So
within the 5 days.
Yeah, so I've mentioned the right and an obligation.
Yeah.
So what was your obligation as a consumer? Yes, you have been enticed, but did you really need that credit? Did you think about it? Did you consider whether you can be able to repay? Because that's another thing that consumers don't think about.
I see your
We
point.
are always approached by credit providers and their offers are enticing. But think about it, credit is expensive because there is charges such as your interest rates, there is service fees. If you default on that credit, there are other collection charges like your defaults and all that. Think about it. Do you need the money to go on a holiday? Do you need the money? What do you need the money for? So credit is not at all bad, but it becomes bad if we're using it for consumption. And oftentimes consumers get enticed to say, oh no, it means I'm credit worthy, but you really need to think about it.
Wow. Interesting. Now coming to the issue of complaints.
Yes.
Do you have a procedure here at NCR one should follow when he wants to lodge a complaint with NCR?
Yes, we do have a process. There is a form that consumers, when they call us or they check it on the website, we call it Form 29. It's a form that they can use to lodge a complaint. And what we always advise consumers to do is that on that form, you can also attach a brief description of what your complaint is about. So once again, as a consumer, if you feel you're not sure, or you feel they're charging you excessive interest rate, or there is a conduct that you're just not comfortable with, where credit provider or any of our registrant is involved, you can come to the NCR and we can be able to do an assessment, to advise you whether it's a valid complaint or not. But that's the form that you need to complete and send it through to the NCR, and we've got dedicated personnel who will be engaging with the consumer. So if there's anything that the consumer, credit related, that the consumer is unsure of, maybe you suspect that, I applied for credit, but I think they didn't do proper affordability, they've given me money that I cannot afford, that's what we refer to as reckless lending.
Okay.
You can actually refer that to the NCR for the NCR to have a look and advise accordingly.
Besides NCR, these lenders, do they also have an obligation to educate consumers
Yes.
with regards to such issues?
Yes, so lenders, all our registrants, they do have an obligation to educate consumers on the agreement that they're entering into. I've mentioned the issue of disclosure. So they mustn't just say, sign here, sign there. So they need to take you through to say, we're giving you this much, this is the life of the money that we're giving you, if you're going to pay it in 5 years. So educate them so that consumers understand the implications of accepting that 10,000 that is being borrowed. But generally, credit providers do have a responsibility to educate the general public on their products that they offer.
Okay, is there an act which covers that aspect of them also having an obligation to educate?
So in terms of the National Credit Act, for credit providers, we do have a code of conduct, and a code of conduct that is prescribed by the NCR makes mention of the fact that credit providers have a responsibility to do consumer education.
Brilliant.
So we derive that mandate from the National Credit Act.
Still on complaints, from what you have seen, what is the most common complaint NCR deals with almost in a now and again basis?
So I would talk about debt counseling related complaints that we receive. You find consumers saying, no, I have not consented to apply for debt counseling. And I would just like to caution consumers against that as well, because we have some debt counselors who advertises debt counseling as debt consolidation. So if it's not explained in detail to you as a consumer, you have an impression that they're going to offer you the money. And remember, debt counseling is meant to provide relief. So there is no granting of any money, but it's consolidating the debt that you have and negotiating with credit providers so that you can make reduced payment. So we've seen a lot of misleading advertisement by some of the debt counselors where they advertise debt counseling as a debt consolidation. So consumers, once again, when someone says, I can assist you financially without applying our minds, you're like, okay, let me sign on. It's consolidation. They're going to pay my debts, and then I'm going to have one installment, which is not the case. So we find a lot of those complaints where consumers actually accepted debt counseling without proper understanding. Some are being placed by some debt counselors without their consent. So for you to be under debt counseling, you need to consent to being under debt counseling. And generally, where credit providers are involved is the issue of overcharging of fees. So you would find some credit providers charging more than the prescribed interest rates, because in terms of the National Credit Act, the interest rates that credit providers can charge are prescribed in terms of this act. So there is a cap, a limit in terms of what they can charge.
Okay.
So we're seeing such types of complaints where the fees are actually excessive and not in line with the act. And we also see reckless lending. I've mentioned the issue of reckless lending, where some consumers are alleging that they've been granted credit that they cannot afford.
In terms of consumer education, do you have programs as NCR which you are running across the country to educate consumers in regards to these rights?
Yes, so we do have a lot of projects or campaigns that we run as the NCR. So internally we have education and communication officers. Their role is to go out there. So they go nationally to educate consumers, whether in the government, public sector or private sector. And what we also do as the NCR to try and reach more consumers, we collaborate with various entities. Some entities are state-owned entities which has a mandate for consumer protection. And we also collaborate with other private entities where the intention is to offer consumer education. And in terms of our plans, we roll out various campaigns in a year. We've just had a campaign on Borrow Wisely, where we were going out to consumers and advising them on the traps of borrowing recklessly, and the fact that they need to borrow wisely, and being aware of unscrupulous lenders within the industry. We had Spend Wisely in December, where we were advising consumers not to be,
to overspend.
To overspend,
Too
because
excited.
January was coming. In March, it's Consumer Rights. We will be having a campaign around Consumer Month, imparting knowledge to consumer. So we do have various campaigns that we carry out. We do self-initiated workshops where there's a need, where we get the communities. We also conduct imbizos, with the tribal authorities, where we go down and try and explain to the elderly as well, not to give away their SASSA cards, because that's also not allowed. So we carry a lot of educational campaigns. We issue media releases where the intention is just to, spread the word out there. And in these tough economic times, it's important that we need to let consumers know, especially of their rights as well. If you are retrenched and you have a cover that will cover you on a loan that you've taken. Because sometimes consumers don't know that when you're taking a loan, perhaps we have what we call credit life insurance, which covers one in if there's a retrenchment. So we go out and educate consumers on those. And we welcome any invitation by any entity,
which is
in the spirit of offering consumer education.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, there is one issue which I wanted to close this interview with. There are these credit providers. I think you have heard about them. These Bomashonisa. Do you have an act which you can get them to register with NCR? Because I've seen a lot of people have actually came across this Bomashonisa and they lose quite a lot when it's time to pay back. Some of them, they even actually surrender some of their assets, their bank cards, and so forth.
Yes.
And it doesn't end up well when it's time to pay back.
Yeah.
Do you guys, by any chance, come across such complaints from consumers?
Yes, we have a challenge with Abomashonisas, loan sharks.
Yes, loan sharks.
You've mentioned that, is there any act? So I just need to point out that the National Credit Act regulates anyone who offers credit. These Mashonisas, consumers need to know. Or consumers, our advice is consumers do business with people who are registered with the NCR. You can request a registration certificate. So these Mashonisas, they have a duty to register with the NCR. If they're offering credit without registration, it's unlawful. That conduct, if we find out as the NCR, we can refer the matter to the tribunal for you, so you can be prosecuted. You can even land in jail as a Mashonisa, because that conduct is unlawful. So consumers need to know, do not do any business with anyone who is not registered with the NCR. Why? Because they charge excessive interest rate.
Yes.
They do not follow us in the act. You've mentioned that they can even attach your assets. Their debt collection mechanism, it's harassment.
Yes.
So in terms of the act, there are procedures that one needs to follow, if a consumer is defaulting. So that's how they operate. They threaten you, and what's going to happen, you will have financial, emotional, and many other diseases because of the harassment that you're getting from the Mashonisas. But like I say, their conduct as well is unlawful. So consumers need to bring it to our attention. If there's anyone who's offering credit without registration, and the NCR will find ways of investigating that individual or entity. So what they're doing is wrong, is not allowed, it's unlawful, and there are consequences to that. Now coming to the issue of taking cards and ID.
I'm going to come back to that issue. What do you think makes these Roma loan sharks thrive, and what makes them not to register with NCR?
What makes them thrive, or why consumers, find it easy to go to them, it's firstly because there's no process. You go there, they don't check whether you're employed, they don't check anything. You want the money, they tell you 50%. And for them, once you get a loan from Mashonisa, it's going to be a cycle that's going to be too difficult for you to come out, because they charge you an interest of 50%. At the end of the month, you don't actually have the total amount that they borrowed you. You will only pay that 50% of what they borrowed you. The following month, you only pay the 50%. So you will never ever get out of them. You never finish paying Mashonisa. So that's one thing for them. I think they've seen that, there's a market for them. So hence my prior comment to say, as the NCR, we want to work with consumers. Because if they do business with people who are lawfully registered, they're also protected. I mean, if a person comes to your house, harasses you in front of your kids, they take your assets, your possessions, what does that do to your children as well? It causes a lot of headaches and, like I say, emotional turmoil. So we need consumers to work with us. So I think that's why consumers find it easy, that there is no checks that are being done. And remember, the checks that are being done is to also protect you as a consumer. I've mentioned the issue of reckless lending. If anyone lends you money and you're not working and they haven't done affordability, you can actually have a claim. And that debt can be written off. You would not have to repay it. So this is what consumers need to understand. For them not to register, previously the requirements for registration were a bit stiff, but when the Act was amended, it made it easy for anyone offering credit to actually register. So in terms of, there is a registration fee that you have to pay, when you register, and obviously when you are offering credit, you must offer it within the confines of the National Credit Act. So you will no longer charge an interest of 50% because there is a maximum cap in the Act that you have to apply. But we have roadshows as well, because we've seen that there's a need for us to get Mashonisas into the formal, lawful sector in terms of offering credit, because there is a need within the communities that they operate in. So we go out, and our drive, we have seen many Mashonisas coming to apply so that they operate lawfully. They do have recourse if consumers don't pay in terms of the Act.
Oh, wonderful.
That's also not allowed. So consumers can actually report them to their nearest police station as well as the NCR. So if anyone takes your ID, your debit card, or they want your PIN, please report them to the nearest police station, because that conduct is not allowed. But what I would like to say as well is that for us as the NCR to win on this, it's a collective effort. We need consumers to work with us. So what we find is we usually conduct what we call raids. If there's an area where we heard that, this practice is prevalent, so we would arrange with our investigators, we go and raid. The people who fight us as the NCR are actually consumers, because they're saying these people, it's easy access. When they need money, they don't have to do affordability and all that. Now that is a challenge.